Thanks everyone for coming to the first EPTS of 2013. So it's the first and last, not the first and last. Anyway, we didn't do it in November, but we're starting off with Glenn's show about climbing in Nepal, especially about the relationships he's built with friends in the Kumbh region near Mount Everest. So it's going to be an awesome show. Thanks again for being here. We got the heaters off, it's nice and quiet now, we're cozy, and I don't think I'll talk anymore. We'll just give Glenn a big round of applause. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I know it's not exactly the easiest day to come to a travel series when you got nasty roads and some of you were working outside with kids and adults all day and being soaking wet, so that's really appreciated. This presentation picks up where a presentation that I gave last year left off, so I'm being a little selfish and hogging the travel series a couple of years in a row. But the first part of the presentation is going to go over just a tiny bit of my last presentation, which is about climbing a peak in the Everest region with a good friend of mine who's a Sherpa. And then so the middle section of the presentation will be about Sherpa culture and what it's like to be in a Sherpa village from an outsider's perspective, mine for the most part. And then the last part of the presentation will be about a project that I have there. So I'm not going to tell you too much about that because I'm going to talk way too much about that. And anyway, I'm a pretty relaxed presenter, so if you have any questions, if you raise your hand, it's going to be hard for me to see in the dark, so just blurt it out. If it gets to be too much blurting, then I'm going to blurt back at you, okay? And then we'll stop the presentation, have a fight, and we'll start again.
Glenn, do you want to be a little darker, or is this good?
I think this is okay. Is this okay for everyone in the audience? Okay, great. So our story takes place in the country of Nepal. Not everyone here has been to Nepal. Not everyone here has maybe been to that part of Asia. Nepal is shares the border with India to the south and to China in the north. India in the west, and Bhutan and India, actually just a little sliver of India in the east. There's a lot of history there, warfare, etc., for drawing up borders. You might wonder, what's in this cheesy name, Karma Project? What is this karma that we talk about? Is this a new age idea that he's about to talk about? Well, yes and no. Karma is actually the name of a man, Karma Sherpa, who I met first in 2008 when I was leading semester study abroad programs in Southeast and Central Asia. And I met him in Kathmandu. We did some trekking together. We were about the same age. He was a mountaineering guide there. I was a mountaineering guide in Alaska. Of course, he'd already climbed Everest and Chorayu, Manaslu, Dhaulagiri, Makalu. And this was only when he was 27 years old. So there was a slight difference in experience between us. But nonetheless, we formed a great friendship, and I kept coming back year after year, originally to do my own trekking and climbing, and later I started coming back with clients working for a couple other different organizations. And we just had this fantastic friendship that still lasts today. We communicate weekly, if not daily, via email. So just a little bit about the last presentation that I had, which was about climbing Amada Blam. This beautiful peak in Everest region sticks up just like a spire of a thumb over all the surrounding peaks. It's 6,812 meters, or just under 23,000 feet there, which doesn't make it particularly large by Himalayan standards, but it's just so beautiful, I couldn't help but try to sink my ice tools into it. While we were out there, we also climbed a couple other 6,000 meter peaks to acclimatize, which is sort of a newer practice in the Himalayas to try to reduce the amount of danger of staying on one summit that might have some pretty high objective hazards. You climb some lesser objectives first. So I'm just going to flip through these photos relatively quickly here. Now we're starting to climb Amada Blam itself. The other pictures were of acclimatization peaks.
So how many
we climbed two, a peak called Sherpa, which is just under 21,000 feet in western Everest region, and a peak called Buche East, which is commonly climbed by Everest climbers now as acclimatization before they go to Camp 2.
That's a great campsite.
Yeah, Camp 9.
You slept in those tents?
What's that?
You slept in those tents?
Sleep is kind of a, grotesque overstatement, but something like that, yeah. Yeah, we figured it could leave no trace, there wasn't any lighting up there, everywhere else was just covered in lighting. Sure.
Good job.
We were really tired. I thought this one just really exploded. This is actually on our descent after we'd already summited, and the sun hits you and you're just sapped. Upper ice pitches are really beautiful. And huzzah, there we are. That's Everest in the background, and that's Lhotse there. So it's really close. These are fantastic peaks. And this is Karma, and this is Banam, who's been a longtime client and friend of mine. And we've gone to Nepal now 4 times together to climb different peaks. Well, afterward, we heard that there was a storm moving in, and we didn't know what to do. We actually ended up climbing these peaks a lot faster than we thought. Still had an extra 20 days in our expedition. 20 days. Storm moving in, bad weather in the mountains, we needed to get out. In fact, they were evacuating a lot of people, and most of the mountain people that are living up there were all leaving their temporary settlements. They sort of usually live at higher elevations during warmer seasons and lower elevations during cooler seasons, or during monsoon season as well. And they were all heading down to better encampments. So we decided to head to Cebuche, of course. It's like Disneyland. A tiny little Sherpa village, 110 people, 18 families. Well, most importantly, it was Karma's village. And that's where he always goes after he finishes an expedition, not only to see his family, but also to share the goods, share the wealth. And he wanted to bring us back to share the emotional wealth of this relationship that I'd had with him for so many years. And I've met some of his brothers because they helped out on the expeditions, and a lot of his neighbors because they helped out on the expeditions. And it was really important to them that I met their families too. So Cebuche is located also in Everest Region, or Khumbu as you'll hear it called, sometimes Solo Khumbu. It's closest bigger mountains. Kayashar is a really awesome triangular peak. Just right here is Mero Peak, which is one of the more popular trekking peaks that I'm guiding later this year, and I'll talk about that later. This is Mount Everest up here. Makalu, another 8,000 meter peak, which has some really technical faces on it. Anyone's a big wall climber here, they want to climb a ridiculous big wall that's double the size of El Cap. There you go. Not for me, thanks. For those of you who've been to Everest Region before, Everest Base Camp trek goes kind of up this ridge, up over this direction, and then up near Namche, and then up towards Mount Everest. I've got to follow that a little bit better, actually. Oh, that's okay. But then up toward Mount Everest. So the location of Cebuche is a little bit off the beaten track. It's about a 3-day walk to the airstrip of Lukla, which is the airport that most people fly into if they're going to do an Everest Base Camp track or come in to climb Everest. And that hike can't be done with pack animals because it's washed out seasonally by monsoons. Narrow, winding trail. There's no roads or anything like that. So access is difficult. And we'll talk more about how that's a problem for locals in a bit. But here's the rest of the tourists getting evacuated. Lukla was backed up for flights for about 18 days as a result of people trying to get out. So most people were calling the travel insurance companies. They had travel insurance and getting out by helicopter. So we traveled east, and our first stop was this monastery, which is actually overseen by Karma's uncle, who's a lama there. And we were put up in some really beautiful rooms. And Karma's uncle had actually just finished 3 years of meditation. That's kind of an extended yoga class. So during that time, he lived in his room for the 3 years. He would exit to go to the restroom and things like that. They don't have toilets inside, but they have helper nuns, you could say, who would come and drop off food. They're not supposed to look at him, so they come into an entryway that's blocked off, leave the food, exit, he eats, goes out, does his thing, he defecates, urinates in the morning, meditates the rest of the day. They don't eat much, it's kind of a fast, but you'll see that the food that they do eat during that fast is Sherpa food, which isn't the traditional fasting food. Right here he's pouring us salt tea or butter tea, which is a Tibetan drink that the Sherpas brought with them from Tibet. It's still part of their cultural heritage.
Where's the nearest crop dealer?
Crop dealer?
Crop.
Crop.
I was
Oh, right. I was like, Wait, what did he just say? Yeah, these are funny. Yeah, you can get knockoff Crocs. If anyone wants some Crocs, I can bring you some Crocs for $5. You can get them in Kathmandu. But yeah, a lot of them, I mean, they're such a perfect shoe. This should be on their website. Llamas in remote villages. I can't access modern commodities or buying these things. Here we all are out together. You can see Banam doesn't look particularly happy in this photo. It's partly a fluke of the photography and partly because he's normally vegan. When he travels internationally, he's more flexible. But Sherpa food is not vegan, not by a long shot. There's butter or milk in everything, everything. So he was having a hard time. I'm really happy because I just got out of the mountains. Altitude sickness is done. Don't have to be exposed to danger other than the food for a long time. And this is just such a great group of people. Here's Karma in front of his house here. The house actually looks quite large. When you look at it, it's like it's 2 stories, nice and taken care of. We'll see the inside in a little bit. It's not as large as it looks, but they're pretty well taken care of. A lot of these houses are more than a century old. They're built first primarily out of stone. There's a lot of stone available, as you might imagine, in the Himalaya. And then finished with mud, sort of mortar. This one is framed with lumber that they brought in that was milled elsewhere outside of Lukla, and they just carried that in on their backs. Downstairs is used for storage of dry goods and materials like firewood, potatoes, gumdruk, which we call mustard greens, barley, corn, things like that. And the upstairs is the living area. Here's his family. This is not his whole family. Most of his family has moved on from the village. It's a subsistence village, so it's kind of a tough life. Once kids are old enough, they're just, I'm bored, you know, there's no girls to date here, there's no boys to flirt with. Let's get out of here. What is a Sherpa? There's a lot of conceptions about what a Sherpa might be. Well, a lot of historians believe that Sherpa comes from Shar and Pa. Shar means east and Pa meaning people. And they're called the Eastern people because the accounts vary. From 300 to 600 years ago, a group of people came across in various migrations, probably not one, but maybe up to 4 migrations, from the southeast province of Kham, which is historic Tibet, and migrated over some ridiculous passes that are amazing trekking routes today, but it's incredible to think about the different kinds of people that would have come over at that time period when the trail systems did not exist like they do now. And there certainly wasn't jeeps up to Everest Base Camp on the north side like there are today. This map shows the ethnicities, various ethnicities or cultural groups within Nepal, and it's a little bit misleading. So I want to point out that the reddish-brown area here are the Bhotia, Sherpa, and Takali people. They live primarily in mountainous environments. But what this doesn't tell you is population density. Those areas, as you might imagine, are pretty inhospitable to habitation. Not only because the environment is difficult for people, but it's almost impossible to grow crops at most of those elevations, or it's simply vertical walls and moraine and glacier. So despite what it looks like, the population of Sherpa in Nepal in 2007 was estimated about 154,000. So when someone says Sherpa, in reality, a Sherpa is a person of an ethnic group who migrated and entered Nepal. But now it's commonly used for any person who does the work of what we think of when we think of what Sherpas do, which is essentially a porter or a guide. But porters or guides may be one of over 100 different ethnicities. There are 152 languages spoken in Nepal, depending on the source you look at. Some say 50, some say 150, so there must be subgroups in there.
But there's Sherpas in China as well, right?
I'm not sure about that. There are certainly Sherpas in India, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if there were Sherpa in China. It makes sense to me, but I don't know. A little bit about drinks. When you're at altitude, some of you may have experienced altitude living near the Sierra Nevada. Even if you're at 12,000 feet, go up from a relatively low elevation, you notice it affects your digestion. And with that effect in digestion, things that are difficult to digest for us are fats, not necessarily so for Sherpa, and fiber. And the more liquid you get in your diet, the easier it is to deal with those things. So a lot of Sherpa meals are practically liquid or are tea. So one common beverage that you'll find is chang, which is an alcohol not too dissimilar from beer. Or those of you who've been in South or Central America might know other fermented corn products that are grown locally and taste pretty similar. It's pretty sour in taste. And corn itself is really not very digestible grain. It's got husk on the outside, you can't break it down. So this is a really great way for people to get the nutrition out of corn. And they drink either a little bit or a lot of it. In one visit of a village, of Karma's village, the second day we arrived, we went and visited all the families who were there, and most of them were around, and I ended up drinking 24 cups of tea and 8 glasses of chang in this visit, and that took about 5 hours, so I was visiting the roundhouse for about the same number of hours I was drinking the tea afterward. Another drink that you'll find, it's more of a traditional drink, and this is kind of a household specialty, it's called pumba. And pumba is served in this really beautiful vessel. It's essentially fermented millet, usually fermented in a vat outside the house, and then brought inside, and you pour hot water on it, and it's like a really delicious, mildly alcoholic tea. You don't really realize how alcoholic it is until you get up to go water the lawn or something. But also, millet, again, can be really difficult to digest. Another great way to get nutrition and get those sugars that are easy to break down, even if you're at altitude and your digestive system isn't doing so well. That's what it looks like a little closer up. Beautiful little berries. And then, probably the most famous drink. You take, some salt, mix it in with this sampa flour, kind of cooked flour, grab some black tea, and then, of course, some real fresh milk or butter. And of course, you get the rancid yak butter tea party. Really appreciated by those of Tibetan leaning everywhere. So salt tea or butter tea that's drank in mountainous regions of Nepal isn't just appreciated by the cup, it's appreciated by the vat. This is not an uncommon sight. If you walk into a monastery, there's often a separate cooking complex, and there's these huge, beautiful copper-looking vats filled with this stuff. You'll see that oftentimes in a corner you'll find thermoses, and those thermoses are just full of this tea, and they just pour cup after cup after cup. In the wintertime, you might drink tea almost non-stop for 6 or 7 hours until the sun starts to go down. In a smaller household, this is the vat you get. It's hollowed out, sometimes made out of solid wood, sometimes it's bored out bamboo, wrapped with brass rings, and it looks a lot like a butter churn, but it's actually made for mixing up the tea. And it makes people very happy. And this is Carmen's older sister, and this is Dawa, who's the son of a cook of ours from expeditions. And then, of course, there's food. In Kathmandu, you're likely to find food of all kinds of variety, including imports from the Middle East, from Japan. But when you get into the villages, it really depends. The wealthier the village, the more likely it is that they'll have things like rice, which can be grown in Kathmandu Valley, but require quartering up into the mountains. In Karma's village, we ate almost no rice. They don't have much money, so everything they eat has to be grown locally. So here they're growing buckwheat, which is an incredibly nutritious grain. It's really beautiful. It grows pretty well at higher elevation. And buckwheat is often processed in a contraption that looks like this. You put it in the top, it goes down. Probably most of you have seen this before. Grinding stones, and you get the flour off the bottom. And there's just how the wheel's powered. If you look at this, almost all of this is just done on site with hand tools, with the exception of these bolts here. Okay, you see that bolt there. So that's one of the only things that they're bringing in from outside the village to construct this. Originally, I was talking with Carmen, we were hoping to fund for a micro-hydro project in the village. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water. And this leads to a lot of health concerns and a lot of environmental degradation too, because of chopping of the forest for use of lumber for cooking and heating. So that's what I took this photo for, but this is the stream where that grinder is located. And this is the product, which is used in wonderful festivals like Losar, which is a Tibetan festival, but since the Sherpas originated in Tibet, they celebrate it as well, where they peg each other, sometimes right in the face, with lots and lots of tampa flour. So the flour itself, after it's ground up, they cook it for a short time at a really high temperature on the stove, for all the reasons I've talked about. Difficult to digest, high elevation, break it down to its sugars, and there you go. Also find ever prevalent Momo. Some of you have eaten these before, I can tell. And the sauce that goes with these, it's essentially like a Chinese dumpling, but inside you find, depending on where you are, sometimes it'll have meat, very rarely unless you're lower elevations. Most of the time it's vegetables, and then the sauce just depends on what's in season. It's like a chutney. And then of course you got potatoes. Cooked in 1,000 different ways, but this is pretty common in the villages. You just throw it in the fire, and you peel it with your fingernails afterward, even after it's cooked. And the reason is because on the fields they're using human fertilizer, and you can get pretty sick if you don't peel your potatoes. Peeling it with your finger, just everything you've learned about keeping your fingernails clean. You're like, why am I peeling this potato? With my fingernail, all right, that's cool. Great. And I actually work in Peru in the summertime a lot of times, so I eat potatoes in everyone's household there, especially higher up in the Andes. And then Nepal, I ate potatoes, so I was really happy when I saw this on the table. I was like, yeah, all right. And Karma couldn't tell me what it was called in Sherpani. He certainly couldn't tell me what it was called in English, but evidently it originated in the Caribbean or in South America. It was difficult to tell with some of the sources I looked at. We call it Ito in the Caribbean, so I'm calling it Ito. And unfortunately, it ends up tasting exactly like a potato. Prepared in the same way, throw it in the fire where it's commonly steamed, peel it with your fingernails, add a little salt, and potato in the place salt. There you go. And then buckwheat pancakes, really delicious. Karma's mom made awesome buckwheat pancakes. They're made with egg and buckwheat. It's kind of like a crepe. And then in the back is another sort of chutney. This is, again, made out of gumdrop or mustard green, sometimes mixed with tomate de arbol or tree tomato, for those of you who know that fruit. And it's really heavy on the salt, amazingly heavy on the salt a lot of the time. It's incredible, because salt is difficult at elevations, it thickens your blood, but we are not the same. And that's a big mental part, of course. And if you're a monk and you are fortunate enough to be locked in your room for 3 years, you get to eat this when you get out. Isn't that awesome? So we got to share part of the celebration meal. After this prolonged fasting, the monks receive all their food from donations. They're not allowed to prepare food themselves. So this is brought to the door, and you just get plate after plate after plate of it. There's some nice Nabisco cookies. I don't know if Nabisco is actually the company under there. And then this is it's a lot like wontons. Popcorn, and then this one back here is called pemmer cake. And I was really excited. I had my birthday in Nepal, and I was so excited. Karma said, "Oh, we made you a cake, it's pemmer cake." And it's beautiful, it just looks like a big raindrop. It's really heavy and dense. It's made out of buckwheat flour, tampa flour, butter, and salt. That's it. So what's Play-Doh made out of? So it really brought me back to my childhood. A lot of Sherpas have to walk 1 to 3 days to the closest school, which means even though school is free, they have to pay for room and board to stay there. It's kind of a problem. Karma was fortunate enough, his uncle gave money to his family after he worked in tourism for a while. He was able to stay at school and get a 3rd grade education. He dropped out, became a porter, earned money for his family, and put it back into his sister's education. Here's a quick video of a Sherpa's home. Can I get you, Dave, to use your finger on that mouse pad there and just click on the image?
Click on who?
Just on the image there. The picture comes up. Yeah, just one question there. There you go. So the speakers aren't working. Maybe crank them up.
There's Karma. Karma's mother, Karma's father. This is their house. They're very embarrassed. I've been videoing.
Yeah, probably loose, huh?
That's on the wall for sleeping. And the pots and the pans from marriage ceremonies. Large drum at the bottom is for making rock soup.
Oxygen and alcohol.
Touch bin here is for water. And there's their cat for eating all of their extra mice.
Yeah, so a pretty simple living space overall. Religion, probably most of you are familiar that the vast majority of Sherpas are Buddhist, as are most mountain people, but up to 14% of Sherpas, depending on the source you read, are Hindu, which is more of the national religion of Nepal, you could say, and a small percentage are Catholic, and a much older religion called Bon, which a lot of people consider the predecessor of Buddhism that was mixed with the form of Tibetan Buddhism that was brought over by the Sherpa, which formed the Nyingma sect. And this is Rinpoche Gompa. Gompa means monastery, essentially. And if you're looking at a map of Nepal, you'll see Gompa, Gompa, Gompa all over the place. That's what you're talking about. And along with monasteries, you'll also see prayer wheels. Inside these prayer wheels are scrolls, oftentimes over 100 years old, that have text written on them by lamas or occasionally monks. And when you spin the prayer wheel, it's thought to read the text off or extend it off to the heavens, sending your prayers off without having to utter them. So I think I would have been really grateful if I had this when I was going to Catholic school.
The nuns wouldn't have liked it.
No, they wouldn't have it. 10 more Hail Marys. So yeah, you have to include a little bit of Bigfoot if you're talking about the Himalayas, because I think, it's pretty seldom, unless you go to a really strange conference in the United States, that you're going to be a population where 80% or higher of people all believe in Yetis. But if you're in a Sherpa community, everyone believes in Yetis. And you talk to people, and half the people have seen Yetis. And people have seen their tracks. People have been attacked by Yetis. So it's a really fascinating thing to talk about. So very briefly. It's a pre-Buddhist idea, which means it goes back a long time. When we think about Yetis, we think about all the kooks and, or maybe there's some, all the wonderful people, I don't know who's here, all the folks in Washington State or California who came across the idea maybe as early as the 1940s, but probably 1950s or after. But again, came out of it. Actually interesting, in the Bon religion, you needed some of the Yeti's blood for some of the spiritual traditions, which is pretty interesting. I found just a couple of accounts of, in 1899, there were Yeti sightings actually by a trekker. They were really made famous in the West after Eric Shipton, who was a really famous, renowned explorer and pretty highly respected scientist in a lot of ways, photographed their footprints. And National Geographic actually did a series of articles and sponsored expeditions to Himalayas, including giving some money to Ed Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, who then claimed to find Yeti tracks in Himalayas during the 1953 ascent. It was really fascinating. And so these are those photographs from Shipton here that were sent back. These are probably the most famous ones. And then to make matters more interesting, a lot of artifacts appear in various monasteries throughout Nepal. So this is in Pangboche Monastery, a scalp in a hand, which is relatively famous. So these specimens have been analyzed, and it depends on what source you look at. Imagine that, on what you get. But a lot of them say some of them are Himalayan tar, which is kind of like a chamois or like a mountain sheep. It lives in the Himalaya. They say it's genetically identical to that, so someone's manufactured these. These hands, all kinds of ideas. Some have come back, they said it's similar but slightly different than human DNA. Others have come back and said it's orangutan, which comes actually from the Indonesian area. So there's a lot of different ideas about where these artifacts are coming from. And of course, a lot of ideas about what type of Yeti they came from. And you can actually find books that are written about the different species of Yeti of the Himalaya, which I never considered before, right? If it's an actual animal, of course there's probably species and subspecies in different sizes. Another monastery, Kunjung Monastery. It's relatively close to Everest Base Camp Trek. You can find scalps. Oh yeah, I'm just about to finish that. But I just thought I'd throw that in there because, you know, we talk a lot about realities and myths and legends here in Yosemite National Park and indigenous people. And I think it's interesting to be in one of those villages where people believe in Yetis and to think, how am I processing this? And I'm being respectful in the way that I think about these and like considering this. Can I consider it from their point of view, from their perspective? My grandfather's grandfather had told me about Yetis and about when they went and they raided their Tsampa, which Karma told me that they had their Tsampa stash raided by the smaller species of Yeti. It's really problematic in view. Hospitality, this is one of the women who made me drink those 24 cups of tea. If I wrote a book, it would be 24 cups of tea, like tea. Yeah. But she was just so gracious. That, I'd never met her before. This was her first time meeting a tourist. We were the second group of tourists that had come to the village that Karma could remember. And they were really sad to see us leave, but so happy we were there. Kami sees tourists all the time, but his son Dao very rarely sees them. And it was really great to be taken in, and he just tried to do his best to make us feel at home. And this is his sister. So this is a short message from Karma. Right before we left, he turned to me and he asked me if I could help, you know, which may have been one of his intentions behind bringing me to the village, because he saw that we had this good relationship and he thought I had a good heart. We'll just see what he says. But can you click that? Maybe we'll check the speakers there?
Yeah.
It should be there. Okay.
Oh, was that a Yeti there?
Yeah, see it right in the bushes.
I am from Sherpa, so I am now 30 years old. I was born in this place. And this place named Shibuje, somewhere it's located in the Everest region. And it takes 3 or 4 days from Everest region to here. And here's on the road. And not more tourists come here. So this is very remote area. And then, so here's not good school and not so here's not medical post. And the people are sick. The people and the old people sometimes very sick. They are carried to Rukla and Everest region and the other hospitals. It takes 3 or 4 days by carry, and then it's very difficult to hear. And the people have no enough money. And the people, one is the farmer, and not more for the tourist sectors. They will not work for tourist sector, and the people have no good education because here's not good schools before here. And then now people try to learn the good English and good education and some computer are not good in school here. So the people want to good school and good education. And this place, the winter season very cold, and the people goes to the forest and they cut a tree and they bring to wood in their home, then fire. The tree is not shape here, so environment is every day is going to bad. So the people want to the solution hydropower and electricity. So if there is electricity in hydropowers, the people they cannot cut the forest. Very shape to forest and very good environment, and then very easy to live the people here. And then the people want to that's one of the problems. People want to electricity and health post, medical post, and education.
Thank you.
So it's tough. Imagine speaking in a foreign language for such a long time, monologuing. Really tough. So I actually tried to subtitle it. I'm not very good with YouTube, and it denied me. But anyway, probably a lot of you can understand. He's basically asking for help and wondering if it would be possible to construct a micro hydro project. So Banam, who was also here with me at this time, and I went home and we thought about it. We contacted a lot of people and I researched it, and it looked like it was going to be like $55,000 and a lot of expertise we didn't have, and I didn't know where to purchase this thing or who to talk to. And so I went with him to the tourist office and I paid a bribe. Not $600, so as a Westerner I didn't have to pay that much. I had a white face and it may have been cashless, but they saw it as a possible opportunity. I, flirted with the idea of going into business with the agent there, and he gave us a business license. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But leaving, when I was leaving Carmen's village, I was also a little bit overwhelmed because you don't just see villages like this that need a lot of help along the way. You also see the environment of Nepal, which needs a lot of help. This is a pretty, actually, well disposed of waste right here relative to some of the areas that you can see. This is not human waste. This is just the way that people fuel their homes a lot of times at higher elevations. This is drying yak dung, which poses some health problems for people along the trail. And this is outside of Pokhara, which is considered one of the second largest city, but considered relatively clean compared to Kathmandu. And this is the Bagmati River in Kathmandu. This is a very typical scene. I didn't have to go on my way to photograph this.
That's primarily plastic there, is that right?
That's right, yeah. The vast majority of what you'll find is plastic, which has come to Nepal fairly recently. And like a lot of things that come to Nepal just doesn't have the infrastructure to deal with it, or people haven't really thought once it starts being imported and people buy it, what do we do with it afterward? Although there are recycling plants in Nepal now. This is India, relatively industrialized, and all of this is running right up against the Himalaya here. Pollution, air pollution. This is over Kathmandu. Outskirts of Kathmandu in the 1970s. Now keep in mind this is a little ways in the outskirts, but just to give you a comparison, here's 2005. Kathmandu in 2000, I think it was having about a 6% growth annually. And it doesn't sound like that much, but if you multiply it out by years, it ends up being a lot of growth, because it's not just 6%, but the 6% of the 6% that was added before. It's that word in the curve. These are wildfires. Possibly caused by climate change. It's getting hotter and drier in the lower elevations, and there's a lot more wildfire than there used to be. And then, of course, harvesting of timber for a growing population, especially around Kathmandu and in other cities where the lowlands have a better forest, and for heating. And then brick factories you'll see just flying into Kathmandu. And a lot of Sherpa, I never really thought about the intricacies of tourism, but if I want to work in tourism and I'm a Sherpa, I live in a remote village, there's certainly no internet there, there's no way for me to access clients or access organizations that will find me work. So I go to Kathmandu, I leave my village, it costs me money along the way, I have to eat, even if I sleep on the ground. I arrive in Kathmandu for a season, maybe I get no work. I'm out of money, maybe that goes on for 1 or 2 seasons. Rather than return home penniless, because I promised my sister that I'd buy her a coat so she'd be warm this winter, I go to work, and sometimes I might get work in a brick factory which doesn't have the most humane conditions, and a lot of, especially young people, die in brick factories from collapses and things. And so, the Karma Project. So the first part of the Karma Project was, I talked about before, to help Karma start not only a tourism project, but a responsible tourism project. Something that could help educate local people through their employment about what it means to take care of the environment. Because a lot of these problems are simply a matter of education. Not only education that this is good for the environment, but also that this is actually something that tourists want. They want you to tell them not to bring that plastic water bottle. They want to see you picking trash up, because they can see trash everywhere, and it's really a distraction. Of course, it's not good enough to start a business. That's great. Now we have something to dump money into without getting any money out. So partnering Carlo's company with other companies was going to be really important to make it sustainable and make it profitable for them. And then that's not enough, because if you have a bad product, clients are going to be turned off. So Carlo's going to need some more training. So the third part of the project, bring power to the United States for training in sustainable tourism, alpine guiding, and English language. And also use his visit as a fundraiser for projects in his village that need immediate attention. So let's talk about the first part, just starting with the company. It's done. So we went to the tourism office, paid a bribe. They saw I was white. He didn't need to have $2,000 in his bank account in order to open a business account. That's a huge sum of money. You talk about, preventing people who are impoverished from having their own businesses. But Banam and I gave him a loan, and we started the company, Higher Paths, Treks, and Expeditions. Got on the website together. Went down, and that was a really interesting process of building a website in Nepal. And we started a bit of advertising and started posting up around Kathmandu, and if you guys go to climbing gyms in San Francisco area, you might see some of our postings as well. And then we were going to need to address some of those waste concerns. So it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, pack it in, pack it out. But that's not doing anything in Nepal, because where do you pack it out to? You saw Kathmandu. Pack it out to Kathmandu? Okay, that's tough. So, and this is, one of the reasons I'm doing this presentation is there's a lot of people who might have a lot of experience, and I am really struggling with some of these issues that are really contradictions for me. So New Zealand has an interesting system. They have their own individual cans. In Nepal, we're probably going to use blue barrels. You can get a lot bigger quantities of human waste in them. They're already used at Everest Base Camp. People are familiar with them. They pack animals, so people don't have to carry them, which is a little bit demeaning. Trying to limit the use of firewood, especially locally cut firewood for warming. If you go on a trek in Nepal, you go in a communal area, which is really great in the evening to stay warm, and there's a cooking fire there, or a heating fire, just for you to stay warm. That's its sole purpose, is just to heat the space you're in. But a lot of us are in Nepal with nice jackets and down pants and everything else. So at higher elevations, it's going to be really hard to convince clients you don't need this fire, but at least limiting or banning its use at lower elevations in slightly cool temperatures. And then using some of the profits, or in this case, this next trip, I'll be donating my entire wage to scholarships, to send some of those kids to school so they can get the English language training they need, which offers them an unheard of amount of possibilities in their life as opposed to not having it, where they can't communicate with most of the people in their country, actually. Because English, although Nepali is a national language, English is spoken by a higher percentage of the population than those that speak Nepali. So we actually ran our first trip last April through his company. It was kind of a teaser trip. It was just Banam and I, but we wanted to test the product. And so we went out to Longtong. I'm going to flip through these relatively quickly, because this isn't the point of this presentation. But now Longtong is located directly north of Kathmandu, right near the Tibetan hills. So here's some photos of our trip. We did provide some training for local Sherpas. A lot of them have been guiding for a long time, but they didn't necessarily receive quality technical training, so showing them how to set up rope systems, climb. This would be my next climb, hopefully. Yeah, this is it. So anytime you're out acclimatizing, sometimes it gets really arduous, and you just really need a break. If someone wants to click on the same button, that's okay. You just need a break, and you need someone else to help you along. Yeah, not bad. It's like almost 17,000 feet he's carrying. That was nice, Rick.
Was that you he was carrying?
That was me, yeah.
Yeah.
Dandy is another guy I work with over there. Our objective for this trip was to train a couple guides for technical climbing skills on a peak of moderate difficulty called Naikonga, which is this peak in the background here. It's just a little under 20,000 feet, and you'll see the route limit here. So there's only one, it's a good peak for people learning. The couloirs aren't too steep, and there's one section of maybe 60-degree ice in here, and that's about it. Unfortunately, that season, due to that storm, this is a different time, due to a storm that had come in, it dumped about 4.5 feet of snow at the elevation of our base camp, which meant that higher up on the mountain, we had a lot of deep snow. So it's really uncommon to come across a pair of skis or snowshoes in the Himalaya. Most people have never even seen a pair of skis. So it was literally hip-deep snow at 18,000 feet, which is difficult going to say the least. So in Alaska, when that happened, we didn't have snowshoes on us, we used to use our shins, so as snowshoes. So you're basically crawling. So we crawled up the ridge, and at a certain point in time, we were like, you know what? If we make it, this is about a quarter-mile distant to the true summit. If we make it, we're not going to make it back before dark. And who cares? We're not having fun. So we went and had a little fun. You can click on this video. Yeah. Sorry.
Let's party on the mountain. No, 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 no.
So it was a great trip. We achieved a lot of the objectives we set out to. We talked a little bit about, a lot of times what's done up in higher elevations is they burn the trash. So we talked about, although that may be a way of getting rid of the trash visually, making sure it doesn't come back to the village with you, talked a little bit about air pollution, which is something that someone growing up in a village wouldn't be conscious of at all, right? Necessarily, or how their actions relate to it, and talked about that for them what mattered was what the tourists wanted, because that was going to result in more clientele, and just telling them that international tourists would be really upset to see them burning plastic waste at base camp at 16,000 or 17,000 feet, and it would be better for you to pack it out, and you can charge more for your trip if you pack it out. And it's really important to think about where these people come from, what are their interests, what is their knowledge, not judge them for it, but help them understand and hopefully find a way that we can care for the environment where it's mutually beneficial.
Can we see that video clip again?
Yeah, at the end, just free, private show. So on to part two, partner commerce business with U.S. tour companies and guide services. Thank you, John. So Y Explorers partnered with us, and in 2015 we'll be offering Everest Base Camp Trek with Karma and I. And again, we'll be a lot of that money will be going to scholarships in Karma's Village, that will be put into a project fund that will be up to the village to decide what happens with it. And we'll be employing the local people. So the money going directly to them, they can spend it as they want. But as you can see with Karma, the Sherpas tend to spend it on their family and other communities. This is just on John's website. And but we still wanted to do technical mountaineering trips. So you can, as you might imagine, the insurance for that is a little bit more than $10, so I couldn't afford it. And so I had a friend who was an examiner of mine for the ANGA, and which is a guide association for mountaineering in Washington State. He had his own guide business, and so he sponsored us. His name is Mick Pearson, and he runs Coffee Venture. Yeah, you know Mick. Exactly. And so you'll see some flyers back there on the table. If anyone is interested, or anyone else that you know might be interested, we'll be climbing Rara Peak, which is a peak just behind Karma's Village, employing local people. There's two options. There's a climbing option up Rara Peak, which is just over 21,000 feet. repeat. And there's the trekking option, which most people most younger people with reasonable fitness or older people with high fitness can do. Older people is like 100 years plus, just, you know, for those of you who are worrying about that. This is a flyer for that, which you can find on the back table. Okay, part 3, being a convert to the United States for training. Also use this visit as a fundraiser. Thank you, family of Matt Baxter. So some of you may have known Matt Baxter. He died while climbing El Capitan in the mid-1990s. He was a resident of El Portal here. He worked for Nature Bridge, which I work for currently. And in his honor, his parents created a foundation, and they give money to people like me every year to chase a personal dream. And so my dream is to help Karma achieve a better state of living for himself and his community. And so off we went. After months and months of gathering paperwork, which you've ever sponsored someone for a U.S. visa from an impoverished country like Nepal, I wish you luck. This is the table of contents for the visa application process. Imagine me, I'm like, okay, I have to get my tax documents from the past 3 years. Is this a good thing to include or a bad thing to include? Given yes. So, but ultimately, we were unsuccessful in our first attempt at getting a visa. So this year I'm going back from Mirror Peak and I'm trying to get him a visa again. The consulate, I wasn't allowed to enter the consulate. Only Karma was allowed to go in for his interview, which is difficult because of his English language. He said that the person working spoke a little bit of Sherpani, which is spectacular for an American man. And he said he was very kind, but ultimately we were denied because he said we were applying too early. He said we needed to apply 2 weeks before our intended departure date. So I'm not going to go into how frustrating that is and what that means for people with little money or who have work schedules or families, but you can imagine the kind of barriers. And so our intentions in the United States are to buy this airplane. Okay. All right, to climb Denali. This is in Alaska. And the reason for this is, number one, publicity stunt to attract attention. And number two, fundraising. So there may be some people in this room, actually. I'm looking around. I don't think any of them are here right now. But that are actually going on this expedition as well. Money is basically being given. Of course, Karma needs equipment for this expedition. He'll also be able to use that equipment in Nepal for his company. So by outfitting Karma, he'll get that equipment. He'll also receive some money from other people who are going out there in their individual teams who are raising funds for this event as well. And that's made possible through the Baxter Fund. Oops.
Have there been any Sherpas that have climbed Denali?
Yeah, there have been quite a few. Actually, man in Pariche, which is in Everest Region, was a Denali Ranger for a number of years, and he's Sherpa. Yeah. So, yeah, the project does have a long way to go. We need to make this sustainable. We've got a really amazing start. I've been pretty overwhelmed. The Mirror Peak trip is off to a great start. I have enough clients to fill the trip already, which is great. There's still spots on the trip, but enough to get running. And can hit that play button. A traditional Sherpa dance.
Yeah. Now we know where Sai got it.
Exactly. Well, there are ways you can help. We are accepting donations on Indiegogo site, and we have a computer set up in the room. If you'd like to make a donation, it's an easy way to make a donation by credit card. If you'd like to make a cash donation, we also have an envelope in the back. You're going to have to trust me that the funds are going to Karma Sherpa. Put you in touch with him. You can contact him yourself. Make sure he gets whatever your donations are. It's outlined on the site what exactly those donations go to. English language training, training in the United States, including some transport costs that aren't able to be covered by the grant that I received through Baxter's, and some advertising costs for his company in Nepal. Or you can come on one of our trips. And I would love for anyone from El Portel to come on the trips, because when you come back, you're going to spread the word amongst more people. This is such an amazing community of adventurous people. I just feel like if amongst your families, amongst our community, we can get a number of people to fill some of Karma's trips and really help out. And I would love to give folks a huge discount too, to come on one of these. So just scratch this out. If this doesn't work for you and you really want to come, maybe we can work out a trade of some kind. And I already had the deposit put in for this 2 days ago, but I'm happy to take a deposit after if anyone here would like to go, or if you know anyone who'd like to go on a trip. And hello peeps. In the back I have a sheet. You can put your contact information on there, regardless of whether you want to give a donation or anything like that. If you're willing to spread this through Facebook to your friends, and just put a little note on there. It's amazing. I've been surprised. I'm like, there's no way I donate to that. And then I get this thing in and someone's donated. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not every person. That's awesome. You know, it's amazing how many wonderful, caring, giving people there are out there. Tell your friends and family. Post a link on Facebook. Or you can give us stuff, hard goods, if you have any. Sleeping bags, 20 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. Mountaineering clothing, size women's small to men's large. In Nepal, they have no idea that, you know, pink is a women's color, so that is not a problem. I don't believe pink is a women's color, for those of you who are wondering about that. Mountaineering boots of any size. There's a lot of foot types out there and shapes. And in the event you don't need your mountaineering boots and they're in good shape, like, don't worry about it. We may be able to sell those and use the money toward the common project. Horse-using mountaineering tents, sunglasses suitable for snow travel, which are a real concern. A lot of people with cataracts out there who've been guides and porters. Ice axes, crampons, senders, icers, haxes. I'm sure you guys still climb with these. Pitons, for those of you who've given up your 8 days. We use those to fix routes. Thank you very much. Questions?
First meet Karma.
I met Karma in 2008, in the winter of 2008.
Done a lot,
Yeah.
5 years.
You know, it's a typical friend relationship on the other side of the world, right? Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing.
So if he comes to the United States, where is he likely to be studying English? Or doing studies?
The idea behind coming to the United States, the money that I'm requesting is actually for him to take English classes in Nepal before he comes. And then his study in the United States, COP Adventures has actually offered him some work as well. So we're working on that, and he'd be conversing with clients. I'll actually be bringing him here to El Portel to give some presentations too, if we're able to get that. So he'll be talking with you all in front of people. That'll be pretty good practice.
Yeah, it sounds.
Yeah, he'll be at himself with a lot of big boss of charm, probably.
I just wanted to add something that totally wasn't in the presentation, but I think if anyone's interested, I just think it's interesting that Karma is married and just had a baby this year.
It's true. We had a baby almost on my birthday, actually. Yeah, actually, it was kind of ironic. His wife, Purva, is a close friend of mine as well, and I didn't have any pictures of her, because if you've ever had one of those friends, you would get out the camera like, and they run into the closet. She's kind of one of those folks, but she's, it's interesting. One of the questions you often get is, how does his wife feel about him being gone all the time? Well, they actually got married right after he got back from his expedition on Cho'oyu, and then 3 weeks later he left for Manaslu. And it's not uncommon in Sherpa society, not only because of tourism, but also because for many, many years, men have gone off, worked in fields that are far away from villages, that are at lower elevations a lot of the time, so they can bring crops back up to those villages in harder times. So separation is kind of a normal part of those marriages too.
Do you have a son or daughter?
He doesn't know yet. Yeah, she's pregnant. She doesn't know yet.
Oh, no. Didn't she give birth?
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Why?
Yeah, no, you know what's ironic is never mind. My brother is having a kid right now. But anyway, different family, not the Poly family, the other family. It's a boy. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. So thanks everyone for coming. Next month, there'll be a family presentation, including Lupin, who's already starting. Lupin's the most motivated to get that PowerPoint going. We got a month to do it. So on a 7,000 kilometer road trip around Europe. So we're gonna do a slideshow next month, and there's an empty slot in February or March. So if you or someone you know has done something really cool or interesting that you'd like to share with the community, or you'd like to see their slideshow, or motivate someone to give a slideshow that, you know, we'd all enjoy, let me know. And we have other ones going on later in the season. But thanks again for coming. Thank you, Glenn. There's information back there. And if you can all help, as always, blue chairs on that side, stack them, and have a lovely, warm